So thank you very much, Ricardo and Anne, for the invitation and the opportunity. My research has been about the reassessment of a differential approach in the Brazilian jurisprudence, and my extended abstract was dialoguing with this and bringing some of recent decisions held in Brazil in that scenery of the fighting the pandemics. And I have one or two new events to share with you all. So as a starting point, I should highlight the cultural resistance that we have in Brazil to a differential approach in judicial review. And this is very important to be understood, because you have a lot of resistance in the judiciary and even in the academy when you talk about a judicial approach, a deferential judicial approach. This resistance, as I have already pointed in the paper, is due to historical reasons. We came from a dictatorship relatively recently. So in that period, deference was translated as a total blockage to any sort of control, including and especially judicial review. So whenever you mention deference nowadays, people will still remind the idea of blockage and say, no, this will be not acceptable because our constitution grants judicial review over any kind of threat or violation of rights. So we have that historical resistance, and full revisibility of administrative choices is seen as a democratic conquer. So this is something that we should not give up, and a differential approach look like a setback. The non-delegation doctrine, which is pivotal in the American understanding of deference, will not help us very much. We don't have an express clause like this. We surely do have the separation of powers clause, but we don't have a non-delegation doctrine. And even the idea of the limits in which legislative delegation can be done in Brazil, this is something that is not very, it's not a major subject. We don't have a lot of things, a lot of thinking in that point. So if resistance is here, it's present, it's in the imaginary of the people. So how to overcome that resistance? The strategical solution that we can see here and there in recent judicial decisions is to rename the approach. So instead of using the deferential approach or the deference doctrine or mentioning the deference, the court is using the argument of institutional capacity. And we can see the strategical change in the expression, in the name, because it's mentioned in the paper. There was a relatively recent precedent in our constitutional court in which deference was mentioned with all the letters, with chevron inclusive, and the court was very divided. In fact, the result of the decision was a tie. So the court changed the denomination and started to mention the argument of institutional capacity. One cannot claim that there is a fully developed theoretical framework in using that argument of institutional capacity. And here I address somehow to Adriana's, I think it's Adriana's question about, well, how will you understand the application of the differential approach whenever you have an agency that is not sufficiently accountable, or in which the decision was not entirely adequate when you think about procedure? We have not reached that point yet, Adriana. We are still, well, this is an argument, this is something that we can use, the idea of the institutional capacity. So we still have non-developed aspects on the model, as when can you claim that an agency has the required institutional capacity? Which kind of features an agency should sustain in order for you to recognize, oh, this agency have institutional capacity? This has not been decided or designed by the court yet. And the second non-developed aspect is, should the court consider if that institutional capacity that an agency might have in abstract, should the court examine if that institutional capacity was in fact applied? So this is somehow the question of reviewing of substance and reviewing of procedure that was mentioned by Anne also. Thinking about recent decisions that were mentioned in my abstract and are related with the idea of a deferential approach or using the Brazilian Constitutional Court preferred denomination, the institutional capacity approach. We have at least two decisions, recent decisions, they are post-pandemic decisions related with provisional measures that were taken in order to combat the pandemics. The first one will be ADI 6341, in which the court was deciding about states and municipality competences on administrative measures. And here I'm addressing Ilaria's question about what kind of administrative measures were involved in that decision. Well, the court decided that, I should give a step back. We have a provisional, what was at stake? A provisional measure edited by the president, but should be approved by Congress. This is how the system works in Brazil. And in that provisional measure, the president bring back to central government the decision on all the measures related to combat the pandemics. So all kind of administrative decisions were submitted to central government and to central government agencies. So this provisional measure was challenged in the court, and the court decided, no, this is not how things should happen. The Constitution designs competencies for all the federative levels. Therefore, the central government should grant states and municipalities their constitutional granted competences. So this was the decision. And in what would this signify concretely? Which kind of decisions states and municipalities in Brazil can enact due to that court's decision? Well, any kind of administrative decision seen as necessary, instrumental to grant the combat of the pandemics. So you have, for instance, the city hall in São Paulo, the city of São Paulo has approved a car rotation to help in social isolation. They've tried this. It was not successful. So they give up, but this is their decision. I think that this is the only city which used that strategy. But there are cities in the Northeast which adopted people's rotation according to their social security number. So if your social security number is 2, you're allowed to go out and do a little running and Mondays, so things like this. Cities can decide for a sanitary blockage, for instance, of non-residents, and it happened in holidays. beachy areas decided in that kind of sanitary blockage. If you're not resident here in this city, you're not allowed to enter because this will increase the risk. So these are the kind of decisions that states and cities can held. What was the court's argument? They have a formal argument, the constitution designing of competences repartition, but they have also a substantive argument, which it goes back to the deferential approach. And they say states and municipalities, due to proximity, were the most adequate entities to decide and calibrate administrative measures on fighting the pandemics. So this is somehow the idea of institutional capacity. You that are very close to the problem, you are the best instance to decide what kind of measure is necessary. The second decision, relevant decision held by the Supreme Court post-pandemics, was in ADI 6344 regarding also a provisional measure on labor relations. And here again, the court upheld the provisional measure based in the double argument. The first reason was this is supposed to be approved by Congress, so the political aspects of the decision, we, the court, are not the ones supposed to decide. This is up to Congress. And the court also asserted that self-restraint was the right position in matters involving an intricate normative framework and the balance of diverse institutional arrangements. So they say labor relations, this is a mess. There's a lot of normative frameworks. There's a lot of interest competing here. We are supposed, our best position will be to be self-restraint. I point out that the Congress have approved that provisional measure. And a late reference that I should do was a recommendation held by National Council of Justice. This has been enacted after 10 days, maybe. And it's a recommendation. It's not mandatory, but it intends to establish some sort of judiciary guidance. And in that recommendation, the National Council of Justice referred to a deferential approach to the decisions held by health managers. So we are seeing again deference appearing. So this is the newest information in the matter. Thank you very much.